Hello and welcome, beautiful friends. I'm Kendra, and you're listening to the Renewed Minds podcast, the show where people can be heard, known, and cherished for their own mental health story. Welcome back to the Renewed Minds podcast. I'm so glad you're here. We are going to be hearing from the lovely Morgan D'Souza today, and she's going to share her testimony about how Jesus brought her through some mental health stuff, more so like mental health game. So I'm so glad you're here, Morgan.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. So excited to do this with you.
Cool. Awesome. So let's just get to it. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, my name's Morgan. Was born and raised in Kelowna. Came from a Christian family. And even though I was raised here, I haven't actually lived in Kelowna for a really long time. So pretty much have spent most of the last decade actually going around and traveling and doing life and ministry with Jesus. So met my husband in California. We met there, got married there, spent most of a year in India. And then when we were there, the Lord actually opened doors to come back to Kelowna, which was wild because I, at that point, never thought Kelowna would be home again. So he brought us back here. It's been 2 years, and now we're plugged in with incredible people, and it's really exciting to be here and to see, okay, what do you have for us? What's the reason we're here? Cool. Yeah.
That's awesome. Little just fun question. What's something that you're currently obsessed with?
Oh, currently obsessed with. Such a good question.
It can be anything.
Anything? Okay. There is this playlist that I cannot remember the name of, but it is like my go-to right now. And every time I've got like space in the house or time in a car ride or whatever, I put it on, and it's my jam. It's my go-to. I dance to it by myself in my house. It's just like my thing in this season. And I can't remember what it's called. I know it's Phil Wickham something or other, I believe, or something, I think is the list. But I'm pretty obsessed with that list right now.
Cool.
Yeah.
We're going to have to need the details on that. We'll put it in the show notes. I love me a good Phil Wickham playlist. Okay, that was literally my next question. Which worship song are you most jiving with? Like, which one has been really speaking to you in the last little bit?
Yeah, I think it's part of this playlist. I think it is called Real Love, I think. But there's this line in it. Actually, there's a few. But there's this line in it that he's not looking for religion; it's a relationship, which is the foundation. Yeah,
I know. I know exactly which one you're talking about.
So that one's really good. And there's another song. This is one of the things about me. I never remember artists or the name of the songs, but there's this one. And the line is, and it gets me every time I trip. Every time I hear it, why are you looking for the living among the dead? And it's this line, and I'm like, every time I hear it, it's just such a reminder that even though he died, there he is living, he is breathing, he is with us every single day. And so those two songs, which I can't even tell you the name of, but those two, every time gets me. Every time I'm like, wow, he is so good, and he is so real, and he's so out there. Awesome. So yeah.
Cool. Okay, yeah, fun little questions just to get to know you a bit better. So can you tell us a little bit about your childhood and how you grew up?
Totally. As I mentioned before, came from a Christian family. My parents are super solid Christians. They are great. They were super involved with our childhood. My dad actually ran a business right on our family property. And my mom homeschooled us. So it was literally this little unit where dad would go to work and we were all on the property and he'd be home for lunch. And I think that because that was my upbringing, I think that was a big reason why I was so solid in my identity through my teen years and through high school and stuff. So was actually homeschooled up until high school, and then did the whole, family was such a big part of who we were. So all of that helped really set who I would be and how I would step into my adulthood.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. So how was your mental game growing up? Kind of a similar question.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's because my parents were both Christians, were healthy, were involved. Now that I'm older, I've learned a lot about how the dad figure, your dad is actually the person who speaks a lot of identity into you, which is why now that there's been a huge fatherless generation, why identity is what is missing in a lot of young people nowadays. So I had that. I got that in my dad. He affirmed me in a lot of things. He is a very straight shooter. So there'd be things like, oh, you're really good at that. Or like you would know things that you were and weren't good at because you could have a voice of authority speaking into it. So my mental game was great. I felt loved. I felt seen. I felt belonging. All of that. So I didn't struggle a lot at all when I was younger. It was super blessed that way. I had a really great childhood. Things started getting wonky right after high school.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the next step.
That's the segue.
So then what happened after high school?
Yeah. So high school was great. I walked in super strong. I knew who I was. I wasn't going to compromise on my values. I was a Christian, and not just Christian, the word. Really loved the Lord, walked with him, had a relationship with him. Things changed when I dated someone I shouldn't have dated, and I knew better, but my heart said one thing, my head said the other, and we'd actually had our hearts tangled up for a little while before we even stepped into the relationship, but it felt like we've tried this and we've tried this, and like we've tried not dating and it's still not worked out, so why don't we try dating? So there was a lot of like pre-groundwork that was laid before I actually said yes to being his girlfriend. And then that journey, walking that out, being committed to a non-believer and just navigating stuff there, that was where things started getting a little different and a little bit harder for me. And I ended up getting super hung up on the relationship ended because it's hard when I remember somebody said to me, they were like, it doesn't matter if he's in the same chapter or not of life as you, but he should be in the same book. And they kind of said that to me, like, he doesn't even believe the same things you believe. Like, where do you think it's going to go? So it did end, and it was hard for both of us. First love, first relationship. But it was my mental game after that ended up taking a huge dive. So that started getting really bad really fast.
So how was your mental game after that all happened?
After the relationship? Yeah, honestly, dating a non-believer, he was great and super respectful of my beliefs. So dating him didn't actually rock my faith so much as not having the Lord come through. Because I had grabbed onto the scripture, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. And I feel like I had that. I really did. Like, I felt like I had it. I'd contended so much for it, had prayed into this relationship so much, like really, really wanted it to work out. And when it didn't, he had actually gone the other way and was kind of like, I'm an atheist. And so for me, it was like, my little heart was totally broken, where I was like, oh my gosh, like, how do you spend that much time with me and be that important in my life and see so much of my life and who I am and what I believe, and it actually turn you the other way? Like, how do you go from, I don't know anything about the Lord, I'm curious to find out about him, to spending time with me up close and personal and being like, nah, he's definitely not real. So I was super devastated over it and over losing him. And so that was actually that was the first crack in my foundation. And so we ended things, had a summer at home, moved back to university, single, feeling like this relationship I'd wanted for so long, had been tangled up in for so long, like, it's over. And we've tried the not dating route, didn't work. Then we tried the dating route, didn't work. And I was just like, what do I do with this guy? Like, either way, he's not fitting into my life and I really care about him, but there was no peace in that. And so in that season where I'm heartbroken and suddenly my whole foundation of my faith is coming under a little bit of a pressure point, like, Jesus didn't come through. He didn't answer that. Your ex is now an atheist. Like, you totally failed in this area. You've lost years of your life. You poured out all this love for nothing. Like, all of us, it just felt so shaky. And it was like, oh no, does he even hear me? Does Jesus even hear me when I pray? So that crack was huge. And then if your faith starts coming under question, then all these other areas of your life do too. So for me, it was like, okay, does he even hear? Does he even care? Is the Bible legit? Are the words I'm reading truth or not? So in that next semester at school, it was kind of like, you know what? I don't actually know. I'm going to step a little bit more into the party scene a little bit. I'm not going to be as careful. I was always like, they would used to call me like Mama Morgs. I took care of everybody, was responsible, looked out for everybody. Kids in my high school could go to parties if the parents knew I was there, because they were like, if Morgan's there, you'll be fine, so you can go. So like, we know Morgan won't let you drink and drive, and Morgan won't let it get crazy, and like, she'll take care of you. So that was always who I was and what my role was. And suddenly everything was like, I don't know if any of this is legit. So I started stepping out a little bit more. And in that season, it was just kind of like crumbling, like pieces were crumbling. Fast forward to I came home from Christmas, and there's something that happened in my family, was super struggling with it, not having a great time. And this friend group, my high school friend group, I'd always been like the kind of like the North Star. So, and because when we had been all through high school, we weren't legal, we wouldn't drink. So it was like anything that we went to, everybody knew, oh, Morgan's going to be there. We're not bringing alcohol, that kind of stuff. They were really kind to run things by me. So we're home all of us are home from university for Christmas. I'm there that year, and it's after the semester of being like, I don't really know what I believe, and I'm trying to figure it out, and I'm going down different avenues that aren't working. Nothing crazy, but just kind of like, I'm not sure. And something happened in my family, which was really hard for my young heart to take. I got a text while I was at this family function, and my friend, because we were all really close, my friend had wrote in this group, like, hang out or like sleep over at my place tonight, like question mark, and it's in our high school thread thing. So I responded like, yep, I'm free and I can be there like after this time. And someone responded, because now we're all older than 19, someone responded in the group like, cool, like, are we drinking tonight? Because once we were all legal, I was like, yeah, you're legal, go for it. And it's in the thread, I'm looking at it, no one's responded, and I picked up the phone and I was like, we're drinking, send. And so it was my call that night, and I was like, you know what, I don't care as much as I have in the past, but yeah, we're going to drink. This is going to be a drinking party. And long story short, we had the party. I was super annoyed at a whole bunch of stuff going on, and I'm not a very big person. Drank a whole bottle of wine. I'd never been drunk before. Drank a whole bottle of wine, and I always tell people, like, when you've never been drunk before and then you've been blackout drunk, it's a really strange experience, but ended up being blackout drunk. And even though I don't remember most of what happened that night, like, I'll always remember waking up the next morning, because I woke up the next morning and knew I had slept with my ex the night before. Like, woke up in bed with my ex at my friend's house. And so that was this huge thing where it went from, okay, you were kind of playing with fire a little bit and you just majorly got burned. And I remember waking up and feeling like, oh my gosh, my whole life has changed overnight and nobody knows it. And this wasn't even the plan, sort of thing. Yeah.
Whoa. Thanks for going there.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. That's really deep. That's really vulnerable. And I really honor you for sharing that. Yeah. So I know a little bit of your story.
Yeah.
What happened next?
Yeah. This is where the story really begins, because, like I said, didn't deal with shame or a lot of the heavy emotions through my childhood. Suddenly, overnight, it's changed. Wake up, had been saving myself for marriage. I'm like in a bed with my ex. He's like facing the other way, and all these thoughts, I'm young, all these thoughts going through my head. Like, do I wake up and talk to him? I always thought I always thought I would be married before I had sex, and now this has happened. And I always thought it'd be like the morning of your honeymoon, and like all of these like beautiful, intimate moments. And now it's this super like isolating, scared. I don't even know if I can talk to you because we're not even together, and this happened the night before. And I remember getting up and going out and like sitting on like all my friends had already left because I got super drunk the night before, so I don't even know what time people left. But I went out of the room, decided even if I wake him up, this is so awkward to have this conversation. Like, we never slept together when we were together. Now we're separated. This just happened. My buddy was playing video games on his couch in front of the TV, so I like just felt so numb. But I sat next to him, and he's kind of like, "Hey, Morgs," and just kept playing his video games. He has no idea what's happened in my life. And I remember laying my head on his shoulder and just silently crying and being like, oh my gosh, like, what have I done? And like, I can't undo this. And what does it mean? Like, what does this mean? So he wasn't even aware I was crying. But then I had this thought where I was like, oh my gosh, if I'm still here and he wakes up, that's going to feel so weird. So I left, and you know when you have your emotions like so high, it's like right here. Like, it's like you can feel it in your throat and you're like, they're right here. They're about to like tip over. I remember going home and like mentally bracing myself because my family was so close and I was so connected with them. And I braced myself like at the front door because I was like, okay, like my whole world just got ripped out from underneath me and everyone's going to see it on my face, and this is about to be this like this is what just happened. And so I braced myself and I opened the door, and I remember looking in the house and being like, why is nobody here for me? It was this thought of like, this is the worst morning of my entire life, and like, why is nobody here for me? And then instantly it was like, yeah, but Morg, why is this morning any different than any other one in your life? And so I'm standing there being like, I need someone right now, but realizing, Morg, you've always been the responsible one. You've always made the right choices. This was not the first time you slept over at someone's house. Like, so there's no reason for someone to expect that that today would be the worst morning of your life. So all of my emotions that I was ready to share with someone that were about to spill out, there was no one there. So I just put them all like in.
Whoa.
had a shower, cried in the shower. And when I came out, there was still no one there. And it was this moment of like, okay, no one needs to know. So it was this decision of like, no one's here. I don't even know how to process this. I just won't deal with it. And I like put it all in. And there's so much to the story that I don't need to unpack. But that was a thing where I actually made the mental choice. Okay, no one's here. And I just dealt with a lot of my emotions right now. So I felt like I emptied the tank a little bit. But I hadn't actually dealt with any of it. So I stuffed it at that point.
Okay. Okay. So then what happened after that?
Yeah, I'll fast forward the story
Yeah.
for time's sake. Went back to university, had an awful semester. By the end of it, I knew, I was like, you know what? You're losing your faith. You're losing who you are. You need to make a radical life decision to get out of this. Otherwise, I was actually scared if I finished my program, I wouldn't recognize the version of me who would walk the grad stage. That was kind of my thought. And so I was like, your life is falling apart now. You need to do something now. So I bought a ticket and a backpack. So I bought a one-way ticket to Australia and packed up my whole life. I finished the semester, saved up a bunch of money, and just left. And part of it was there was so much shame in my life where I didn't know, because there was no one there that morning, didn't know how to talk about it, didn't have the emotional intelligence of even how to deal with these big, heavy moments or emotions. And I literally, my thing was like, I've screwed up my life so badly in Canada, and all my friends, like, they would think so different of me, and there's so much there that would be really, really hard. I'm going to go to Australia. I'm going to figure out myself, and maybe I won't even come back. Like, maybe that'll just be my clean state. That'll be my starting over. So I ended up in Australia, and in that season, the backpacking world is very interesting because every single day you can decide who you are. You are having such short relationships with people that I could meet you at a hostel, and there's no, like, we're in a foreign country. I don't know anything about you. I don't know anything about your family. I don't know, like, anything. So you could be any version of Kendra that you want to be. You could be party Kendra. You could be mom Kendra. You could be hippie Kendra. You could be whoever, and I would not know that that's not who you are. And so I suddenly, and while I'm having this identity and faith crisis, was like every day it was in my face. Who do you want to be, Marks? You could be anybody. You could be anybody. And you could be somebody this weekend and change hostels and change cities, and no one would know that you were a different person than you were 7 days ago. So it was this really weird reality that I was living in. And at that time, after what had happened with my ex, I pretty much was like, okay, I'm so messed up. My life is so messed up. I'm not a Christian anymore. It just felt like that was the safer lane. And so when I was in Australia as a backpacker, every day I was confronted with everybody sleeping around and partying, and every single night there's drugs in the hostel, like literally right in front of me. And who do I want to be? Who do I want to be? What am I going to pick? What matters to me? And it's wild, like looking back at it, it's wild because I didn't pick a side for months. I just walked the fence line. Like I was like, Christianity is so full of shame and it's so painful, and I don't even know where to start, that feels like a closed door. And the party scene and sleeping around and doing all this feels super unproductive. And I don't even know if that's what I want, but it feels like the only option. But I wasn't ready to step into that. So I just walked this fence line for months being like, this feels so hard to pick, and this feels so final to pick. Like, who do I want to be? And it wasn't until one day, a couple months in, I got smacked in the face, and it was like, you need to decide right now. And what happened was met this guy who took an interest in me. We were hanging out at a hostel. There was a living room. We would do movie nights at night, a whole bunch of the hostel kids. We were in the living room. We watched a movie. A whole bunch of kids left to go to bed or get high or do whatever. And he's sitting on the couch next to me, and he just looks at me out of nowhere, and he's like, want to have sex? And it was so like, I'm sorry, what? Like, it was so in my face, and my head was spinning, and I was like, people ask each other that? Like, that's a question people ask each other? But I had to actually talk myself down and be like, oh yeah, like, if you're not a Christian, I guess you could have that conversation. I guess you throw that around. Everybody's sleeping around in the hostel world. And Jesus is so kind because in that moment, other kids came in to watch a new movie, so I didn't have to answer him. But I spent the next hour and a half, 2 hours, like, processing really fast, being like, oh my gosh, like, he's waiting for an answer, and what answer am I going to give him? And am I ready for that answer? And am I going to give an answer that's actually true to me, or am I just going to flippantly give him an answer because, hey, you're in Australia, you're backpacking, no one at home will ever know. So I spent the whole movie like, oh my gosh, like, what matters to me? And part of my big thing, if I actually could touch on the shame battle, because a lot of people would say shame isn't a mental health issue, but it was a mental battle for me. It took over my life. It defined who I was.
Wow.
Even if you think about people that you see who are walking or who are living with shame, you can see it on them.
Yeah.
They walk in a room, their head's probably downcast. They won't make eye contact. There's so much when shame lands on you, it takes over you in a certain way that if you partner with it, it literally envelops you. You walk it out, you live it out. It changes how you think about yourself, all of that. So part of my shame battle, to actually dive into what that looked like in my life, part of it was like, you've screwed up so badly that no matter what you do, you can never undo that. Like, that's an unforgivable thing. It's done. It's done. You didn't mean to. It's done, though, and it defines you. And feeling like, okay, no, my big, big lie that I was believing was, this is a huge thing. Purity culture, like, that's a huge thing in the Christian world. You just screwed it up. So you're damaged goods.
Yeah.
And even though my friend who didn't know my story, because I didn't tell anybody, I walked with this all alone, people didn't know what I was going through. Someone who didn't know my story said in passing one day, she was like, I don't know why any Christian guy would marry a girl who slept around. Like, she was like, that's like going to the grocery store and paying full price for a half-eaten chocolate bar. So that's what she had said to me, and not knowing that was me. And so she kind of said it as she's mulling this over, but it like pierced my heart, and I was like, oh yeah, even if I choose the Christian door, even if I walk this out, I can't undo that.
Yeah.
And that'll always be part of my story, and that'll probably eliminate me from a lot of guys' dating pool sort of thing. So as I'm having this crisis on this couch in this hostel with this guy who's waiting for this answer for a super awkward question, I had to come to face with my biggest fear / lie at that point in my life, which shame had put on me, which was like, you're done. Like, that's it. My heart's always been marriage and family, but it was kind of like, you just eliminated yourself. Like, you can't even go back there. And so for me, as I'm literally going through everything, it's like at that point I'd resolved in my heart, like, you'll probably still get married, Morg. It'll probably be someone who maybe is just coming to the Lord and like won't judge you for that part of your life and could probably let it go. And like, it just felt like the stakes were so high. And so as I'm sitting there being like, do I want to sleep around? Because if I'm not being a Christian, then why would I say no to that? Like, what would be the point? So literally in my deepest, darkest, heaviest piece, like part of shame in the story, I'm sitting there contemplating it, and this little thought comes in my head out of nowhere. And looking back on it now I know it's Jesus. At the time I didn't.
Oh, I have chills.
I know. And this thought came out of nowhere, and it was, what if someone would love you?
We're going to need Kleenex box.
And that was it. It was so simple. Like, what if someone would love you? And it was this, like, just the tiniest little thing of hope where it was like, you are battling these lies. You've been wearing them for so long. I'm going to just put the tiniest little sliver in and go, can I challenge your thinking on this? And that was all it took, which is wild. That was all it took, though. It was this thing of what if. And you know how the Bible talks about soil of like 30-fold, 60-fold, 100-fold?
Yeah.
It was like my heart was so ready for someone to speak life into it. Then my heart took it, and I was like, what if? Like, what if? That changes everything. And it was this realization that, okay, you know what happened to you, Marg, was an accident. You weren't trying to do that, but you could let it define you for the rest of your life, or you could not. That's your choice. And if you actually choose to sleep with this guy and choose to walk down this party route, that is your choice. That would be what you'd be choosing. It'd be what you'd be walking out. It'd be you stepping into a whole new realm of shame, of heaviness, of all the crap I'd been working through. And so it was this moment where it was like, you know what? I don't need to let one night define me. I don't need to let one mistake put a cap on the rest of my future or even my marriage.
Come on.
So in that moment, it was like, okay, what if there's one? I only need one guy in the whole world. What if there's one?
Yeah.
So I totally took it to heart, and the fruit that's come of it's been amazing. But it literally meant by the time the credits rolled around on that movie, and other people got up and left to go do whatever, I could actually like sit up on the couch and be like, actually, no. And I'll tell you why. And even though I wasn't calling myself a Christian then, felt like a really big jump to kind of go from the fence to picking a side. I could say no and stand on it and be like, actually, no one's going to convince me otherwise, because I'm going to hold out for a good guy, and I am going to, quote unquote, like, take back my purity in a sense. Like, I'm gonna choose really well, even though I've made a mistake in the past. So that little thought from the Lord, quiet as could be, but I heard it and I decided to partner with it. That one thought totally changed the trajectory of my trip and my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
Whoa. So powerful, Morgan. My goodness. A couple things that I wanted you to touch on. You had mentioned emotional intelligence. Could you share with everyone what that means?
Yeah, I think, and I don't know if this would be the right definition.
Yeah. Your definition.
My definition, yeah. I think a big piece of emotional intelligence is it's really easy to notice the happy-go-lucky feelings. Like, oh, I'm happy about this. I'm excited about this. I'm delighted. I'm surprised. Like, these feel like really easy emotions to name and to put a feeling and a title to. Other ones, especially because I didn't have super hard things in my childhood, they felt like all of these are kind of over here and I don't even know what to do with these. And even recently, I said to some leaders in our life, I was like, I'm still figuring out what to do with anger as an adult woman. Like, I'm like, how do I deal with this in a healthy way? Because haven't like seen that, haven't asked for it, but some of the harder emotions, rage, that's an emotion. Like, how do I actually deal with these? So I think emotional intelligence comes back to, can you actually address what's happening in your body and your heart, different emotions you feel in different places? Can you name them? And then have you actually been taught and shown how to deal with them in a healthy way? And one of the best analogies I've ever heard about like feelings / emotions, first off, feelings aren't facts. Just because I walk into a room and feel like nobody wants me there, that's not the truth. It's just what I feel. So your feelings aren't facts. And the best analogy I've heard about it is they said, think of your feelings kind of like kids in a car. So they said, you shouldn't let the kid drive the car. That would be a terrible idea. You'll probably end up in an accident. So just as a kid shouldn't drive the car, you probably shouldn't let your emotions and feelings drive the car of your life, because it'll probably take you off onto a crazy cliff, something like that. At the same time, kids, just like feelings, don't belong in the trunk. You can't stuff them. If you put kids in the trunk, you're probably doing, like, you're going to get in trouble. So kids don't belong in the trunk, neither do your feelings.
Cool.
If you are stuffing them back there, they'll kick and scream and be really loud for a while, but you eventually have to deal with them. You can't just leave the kids or your feelings in the trunk. At some point, they will make their way back into your vicinity, into your life in some way. Yeah. So what I've heard is your feelings, your emotions, the best place for them in the car of your life is actually the back seat. They can talk to you, like, they're there. You can communicate with them, connect with them. If you're a parent driving and your kid's in the back seat and they're like, Mom, I have to go pee, you'll actually change some things to accommodate what they're telling you, but they're not physically in the front seat driving to the toilet.
I love it.
There's a difference. So I think part of emotional intelligence is actually figuring out how to put your emotions in the back seat so you can communicate with them and be connected to them and hear from them. Not driving your car, not in your trunk.
So good. Yeah. I haven't heard that analogy before.
It's not my analogy. I heard
great.
At school, but it's amazing.
Yeah, I always learn so much from you. Cool. So shame is an emotion.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And you can wear it.
Yeah, you did a deep dive on that already for us. But yeah, emotional intelligence, you didn't realize it was taking a hold of your life.
Totally.
Okay, so then that couch moment was significant and it set you on a trajectory. Where did it send you?
Great question. I will say, so Jesus started it. He was the intervention. I still had work to do after. My life verse would be Romans 12:2, which is, do not be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And I had a mental game after that moment where it was like, okay, I'm going to grab onto hope. I'm going to believe that there could be someone who would love me despite a really big mistake in my past. But then I had to rewire how I thought about a lot of things, because it had been this thing for months and for I feel like over a year, where for so long it was like, you screwed up so bad, Jesus doesn't hear from you, he doesn't care, like all of these things I'd sat with and marinated. I pretty much had marinated in lies for a really long time. So it sent me actually on a journey. I ended up staying in Australia. I did an internship where we went after some stuff and some truth there. But for me, it was like, okay, you have to be so careful what you're thinking, Morg, because when I partnered with lies, right, when that thing had happened and lived them out, I saw it took over. I mean, they were driving my car. So it took over my ability to be present at school, affected all my relationships with my family members, with my friends. I isolated, didn't know what to do with all these big, heavy emotions, isolated. No one can call you out when you're isolated, you're alone. So once Jesus did that, it was like, okay, I'm going to do the hard work and rewire my mind because the verse says it will transform me. So if I renew it, if I work this out, and Caroline Leaf has an amazing book on rewiring your mind and mindsets, if I do the hard work, Jesus promises he'll transform me.
Yeah.
So I want to be a transformed version. I want to go back to the healthy, happy, thriving version of Morgan.
Yeah.
Not this one who's let a mistake define her.
Wow. That's the verse of the podcast.
Is it? Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that it's the podcast is Renewed Minds. Yeah. So that's our verse, folks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you went somewhere in Australia.
Yeah. You want me to talk about that?
Okay, if it kind of sets the tone for how you got. Okay, how about this question? How did you get set free from shame holding onto your life?
Yeah, so the moment on the couch was the big one. Working on my mindset, renewing my mind was a big one. And I think part of it too was I actually had to deal with, you know what? I'm not gonna let something in my story set the tone for the rest of my life. So even if people want to judge me over it, they can, but I'm actually just going to give it to the Lord. I'm going to let him breathe on it. I'm going to let him do what he wants to with it. I remember being in the horse yard with another intern and we were swapping stories and I kind of said something and she was like, Mark, she's like, I know this is a big piece of your story and you feel like it doesn't, like it could limit you in a lot of ways. And she's like, or you could look at it as like this massive launching pad, because you said how many more women in life or men could relate to you and your story if you just give that over to Jesus and don't let shame be connected to it. And so it was cool because it was like, oh yeah, you're right. That just made me more relatable on a huge scale for people. Not saying you do bad things to be relatable.
Yeah.
But it was one of those beauty for ashes moments where it was like, okay, I'm going to give this to the Lord. I'm not going to let people like beat me down with it or define who I am or say I can't do things because of it. I'm just going to be like, this part of my story, I'm going to own it. And I'm going to let Jesus speak to me through it. I'm going to let him love me through it. I'm going to let him define who I am. And the Lord's been so cool because he's used that exact piece in my story. Even when I was at ministry school and I had students I was mentoring, had no idea who they are. You pray over the students you pick them, they get like, they're then yours for the year. And my very first meeting with one of my students, we pulled up to a park, we're having our one-on-one, she jumps out, and she jumped out of her car with a box of Kleenex, and I was like, oh, this is going to be good. Like, when someone comes with Kleenex, that's going to be great. And it was so cool because as soon as she sat in my car and started sharing, I was like, oh my gosh, your story's my story. Okay. And it was this beautiful moment where it was like, I've done this with Jesus, I've done the hard work, I've dealt with it, I've handed it over. I now get to give you tools of freedom and of hope and of restoration that he's done in my life, and now I get to see my breakthrough be your breakthrough. So that was my first ever one-on-one with this student, and I was like, oh Jesus, what I walked through was so hard, and it felt like it took years away from my life, and I had to like have redemption in so much. But to watch someone else get their freedom in a 2-hour conversation, because I was like, no, this is the truth, and this is that when Jesus says washed as white as snow, that's what he means. Like, to actually be able to bring that to someone else and go, this took me over a year to figure out, and it can take you 2 hours, and let's do it together, was huge. So I think part of my shame journey too is like, I'm going to own it. I'm going to let Jesus say who I am and what he can do with this, and then just be open-handed with it.
Okay, last question. What would you say to someone who's struggling with shame?
Great question. Shame is so tricky. My very first thing would be, don't isolate yourself. It is probably the easiest thing to do when you're battling with shame. I think too, I was thinking about this earlier today in prep for this podcast. I was like, why is shame such a big deal? Like, why is it so detrimental? And I think, for me, shame is like a stepping stone to judgment. So when you do something that's shameful, like even take the phrase, like the walk of shame. So
Right.
there's
Yeah.
this phrase that society has coined where you meet somebody, you have a hookup, you sleep over, and the next morning, whether you're walking to your car or back into your apartment or whatever, you're still dressed in last night's clothes, and you probably still have some of your makeup on or whatever. And we've got this title, Walk of Shame. And it's because you're walking feeling ashamed, even though these people don't know you. Based on the circumstance, they can make a judgment about what you did the night before. So they're like, I'm going to judge you and your choices. And even if this is the only 10 seconds of your life I ever know, I'm going to judge you in it because of what I see in front of me. And so I think as people, judgment is a scary thing. It's quite often you don't want to be misunderstood. You don't want to be defined or labeled or have people not know you and like put walls up or have a conclusion about you. And so I think shame is this really detrimental thing in society that if you're dealing with it and you're carrying it, I think because you don't want to get judged by people, you tend to isolate. And then in isolation, that's where the lies can come in. And if you're not having anyone speak into your life, that's where you can marinate in them. And that's where they can change your mindset. That changes your actions and behaviors. Your belief systems are what your behavior is your behavior, I listened to this guy online, what did he say? Your behavior is a language. And so if your beliefs are driving your behavior, everything in your life starts kind of outpouring from this place of shame. So if you're dealing with shame, I'd say definitely don't be isolated. Find someone who cares about you and know right now there is somebody who cares about you. That might be a lie you're believing, but there is someone in your life who cares about you. Find someone who you can actually talk it through. Preferably someone who could take you to Jesus.
Yeah.
All it took for me was one question that Jesus did. Like, what if someone would love you? That was the start of shame coming off of me. So it's really hard to go to Jesus when you are battling with shame because you don't even know where to start. You feel really lost in it. It kind of feels like it consumes you. So I would say find one person. There's for sure one person in your life, even if it means reaching out to Kendra online through this platform. There is someone who cares. There's someone who wants you here. There's someone who would love to sit down and spend time with you because you're worth it. So I think it would be willing to admit, hey, I need help in this, actually getting that help, and then be willing to walk it out. You can't just meet someone once and think it's going to be done and dealt with. You gotta stick it out. You gotta do a little bit of work, but I promise the work is worth it.
Cool.
Yeah.
So good, Morgan. Thank you. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
It's an honor to be here.
I'm going to wrap up.
Okay.
So thank you so much for joining us today and listening to Morgan's story. I think it's so powerful. Oh my goodness. A lot of women are going to get set free. And men. Yeah, come on. And if you have a story that you know needs to be shared, please contact me and we will set up another interview and we will get you on the podcast. So just don't forget that you are so loved and you are not alone. And we want to walk through this with you. So yeah.